Caitlin Clark walked into Gamebridge Fieldhouse on Friday night already furious. Not at the Golden State Valkyries, and not at the opposing defensive game plan. She was completely, unapologetically furious at the fabricated and insulting narrative. There comes a terrifying, defining breaking point for every transcendent athlete, when they realize they are fighting an exhausting, multi-front war. The day before tip-off, Clark sat at the press conference podium and completely dismantled the misleading media narrative. She looked directly into the cameras and corrected the exact, indisputable injury timeline that had been falsely reported all week. She stated the absolute facts.
And I actually went back and looked, because of all these narratives that are going crazy online, about when I told my mom I wasn't going to play the game. 4:47, and you guys found out at 5:20. So one of the most important people in my life found out 40 minutes before you guys.
That was Caitlin Clark telling the entire basketball world that the suggestion of an injury reporting cover-up was mathematically absurd, because the timeline was ruthlessly tight. She appeared angrier than at any press conference this entire season, and the very next night, she transformed that pure, cinematic rage into one of the most devastating, entertaining, and weaponized performances the Indiana Fever have ever witnessed. Welcome back. This is WNBA Pro, and today we are tearing the doors off the hinges to document the most ruthless, vindicating, and aggressive performance of Caitlin Clark's professional career. We are blending the explosive raw anger of a superstar pushed to her absolute psychological limits with the cold, hard, indisputable reality of a 90-82 victory. What Caitlin Clark did against the Golden State Valkyries was not just a masterpiece. It was a statement of psychological warfare directed at the media, the league, and every narrative that attempted to diminish her. We are going to break down the physical punishment she endured, the double technical that awakened a monster, and the brutally honest admission from the opposing head coach that proved Clark is entirely unstoppable. Let me walk you through the true geometry and intensity of this basketball game as it actually happened, because the box score only gives you the numbers. The actual game film reveals a completely unhinged street brawl.
They kind of did everything they could to stop Caitlin. And you got to give Nakase credit, because she is the guard stopper. That's her thing. That's her thing. She's able to stop guards. And she did everything to try to stop Caitlin. It didn't work.
The first half was an absolute physical war. The Valkyries came into Indianapolis with a highly specific defensive blueprint designed by head coach Natalie Nikes. Nikes is considered one of the smartest and most analytical defensive minds in the WNBA. She had meticulously studied Clark's game film ever since her historic run at Iowa. She understood the mechanics of the left step back, the exact range of the logo 3, and Clark's brilliant hesitation move that creates space for the pull-up jumper. As a result, she built an entire defensive scheme predicated on relentless physical pressure to take those shots away. The Valkyries threw multiple bodies at Clark, creating constant disruption and applying nonstop physicality on every single catch. Their clear objective was to make Clark uncomfortable and prevent her from settling into her naturally lethal rhythm. For the first 2 quarters, Nikes' defensive strategy created legitimate problems. The physicality disrupted the timing, while the rotating defenders made it nearly impossible for Clark to secure comfortable catches. However, if the Golden State Valkyries believed this level of pressure and intimidation would make Caitlin Clark back down, they completely miscalculated her psychological makeup.
Before we get to the Gabby Williams, what?
Right before the break, we got a little John going on. Caitlin says, hey,
Look,
you and me, Hayes, you
Kelly,
and me.
look at Caitlin blowing her kisses. Caitlin blew her kisses, bro. Look. So no, it was Janelle Sloan and Caitlin Clark. Referees had to step in. Look at Caitlin, guys.
At the absolute climax of the first half, the tension finally snapped. Clark put her head down, attacked the basket aggressively, and swatted at a loose ball in the arms of Valkyries forward Janelle Sloan. Sloan immediately took exception to the extra contact and got directly in Clark's face. The two began jawing relentlessly at one another as the benches slowly crept toward the hardwood. Veronica Burton had to physically step in to separate the players, and the officials quickly issued double technical fouls, one to Clark and one to Salon. Both teams headed into the locker room at halftime with the tension completely consuming the arena, as if the game was moments away from exploding. What most of the mainstream media failed to discuss was what that double technical actually meant for the trajectory of the second half. To understand it, you have to understand the psychology of a generational competitor. Caitlin Clark is not a player who picks meaningless fights or creates unnecessary confrontations. She absorbs contact, internalizes it, and then weaponizes it. That altercation with Salon, combined with the exhausting week she had endured because of the back injury narrative and nonstop media scrutiny, created the perfect storm of pure competitive anger. You do not break a generational talent with cheap shots. You simply awaken a monster.
It's damn near altering the game, bro. It's just damn near altering the game. Let me pull this up real quick. Let me pull the game cast back up real quick. So it's another timeout. So the Fever call a full time. Why would Stephanie White call a timeout? I don't know what happened. I got to see what happened, guys.
Caitlin Clark came out of the locker room in the third quarter and completely embraced the dark side of competition. She calmly brought the basketball up the court, walked directly to the logo 33 feet away from the basket, and pulled up without hesitation. Tie game at 48. In front of a home crowd filled with tension, doubt, and anticipation, she launched a shot from a completely different zip code and buried it flawlessly. After the double technical, and after an exhausting week of media controversy and criticism, Clark answered in the most ruthless way possible. But she did not simply jog back on defense in silence. Instead, she turned directly toward Valkyries veteran guard Tiffany Hayes, stepped into her space, and started talking unfiltered trash. Not maliciously or recklessly, but in the terrifyingly calm way elite competitors speak to one another during a battle that truly matters. Clark said something, Hayes fired something back, and Gainbridge Fieldhouse instantly erupted with energy. It felt like an on-court exorcism, as if Clark was physically releasing every ounce of frustration built from the media narratives and the relentless defensive pressure thrown at her all night. She transformed that toxic energy into complete destruction of the scheme, standing in front of her. That moment the 33-foot logo, 3 followed by the cold-blooded trash, talk perfectly captured who Caitlin Clark truly is. Not the player who gets pulled with 7 minutes remaining in a decided game, and not the player whose injury timeline gets distorted by reporters. She is the superstar who absorbs an entire week of chaos, drills a logo 3, stares down a seasoned veteran, and completely takes over the basketball game.
Aaliyah Boston off Kelsey assist. Caitlin Clark makes 2 free throws. Tip Hayes hits a 3. Sophie Cunningham makes a free throw. Caitlin hits a big 3 to tie it up from like 30. From 30. They go hit a 3. Hines Allen's okay. And then suddenly it's like Caitlin makes a real tough layup and 1. She makes a super tough and 1 to give the Fever the lead for the first time. Caitlin misses a circus shot, then hits Sophie.
Once Clark hit that impossible shot from the logo, Nikas's entire defensive scheme was forced to adjust desperately. The exact moment the defense shifted, the passing lanes burst wide open and the transition assists began flowing effortlessly. Clark finished the night with a complete masterpiece. 22 points, 9 highly efficient assists, and 4 made three-pointers on just 9 attempts. She battled through 32 grueling minutes, and by the second half, the Valkyries' defensive game plan had completely fallen apart. Clark is simply too offensively brilliant for any scheme to contain over an entire game, without defenders eventually paying an exhausting physical price that becomes impossible to sustain. When Caitlin Clark operates with this level of ruthless, ball-dominant efficiency, the entire ecosystem of the Indiana Fever elevates alongside her. Aaliyah Boston unlocked the very best version of herself, delivering what may have been the quietest yet most devastating 16-rebound performance in franchise history. She dominated the paint completely, scoring 20 points on an efficient 8 of 15 shooting performance. When Clark controls the transition game and finds Boston in stride, this team transforms into a terrifying championship-caliber threat. But to establish full credibility, you do not have to simply take our word for it. Listen to what the opposing head coach admitted after the final buzzer.
16 rebounds with 24 seconds left in this one. Caitlin Clark don't look like she's going to get a double-double, but you never know. You just never know. But they out fouling, so I doubt she get it. 22, 9 and 2. 22, 9 and 2. Solid numbers, bro. Caitlin Clark been averaging 20 points a game, guys.
Natalie Nikes is regarded as one of the most brilliant coaches in the WNBA, with an extensive resume that includes time as an assistant with the Golden State Warriors. She studies game film relentlessly and understands basketball at an elite analytical level. After the 90-82 loss, Nikes was brutally honest about what she had witnessed. She publicly acknowledged that Clark simply made impossible adjustments throughout the game. Clark identified the microscopic gaps within the defensive scheme and delivered precise, laser-guided passes that the Valkyries were completely unprepared to defend. As Nikes realized, you can prepare for the left step back, and you can prepare for the logo 3. But you cannot fully prepare for a basketball savant who diagnoses your defensive weaknesses in real time and surgically exploits them. That is the defining hallmark of a generational player. She does not merely execute her own skill set. She actively discovers the fatal flaws in yours and completely dismantles them. The Indiana Fever now stand at 4-2. Caitlin Clark looks fully healthy. Aaliyah Boston delivered her best game of the season, and the momentum surrounding this team is becoming impossible to ignore. This is the version of Caitlin Clark that terrifies the entire league, not the load-managed version, and not the carefully restricted 23-minute version, but the angry, focused, trash-talking, logo 3 hitting, team-carrying superstar. That is the apex competitor who could lead the Indiana Fever through an incredibly difficult season. On Friday night, she reminded every executive, reporter, and defensive specialist exactly who she is. This is WNBA Pro. Smash that subscribe button right now if you want fearless, high-octane analysis that uncovers the real stories behind the box score. Drop your hottest take in the comments below. Hit the notification bell and stay tuned because this team is only getting started. The momentum is shifting rapidly, and we will be documenting every moment of it.